Swallowed by Hell is the third full-length album from Morbid Saint, a Sheboygan, Michigan-based thrash metal band who started way back in the early 80s, 1984 to be exact, 1985 officially as Morbid Saint, and we'll kind of qualify that with a death thrash metal style or a thrash death metal style. They were a late 80s thrash metal band in most aspects. They practiced their ass off, put together a hell of a demo. The demo got released as an album. They recorded another demo, I think 4 years later. That became an album, something like 20 years after they split, 20 years after they split up. Here we are, 40 years after they formed the band as kids, and this is their first. I guess it's kind of their first official album recorded as an album, but it is their third album per their releases, their third full-length album. Although the first two records technically were kind of cleaned up demo recordings. Not an important technicality, but we get to see what Morbid Saint can do with maybe better resources or at least more time. Modern conveniences and something like 30 years worth of time spent on other things. Basically, there's no telling what this was going to be necessarily, because the history of this band is quite long. There was about a 10-year history of the band that had formed. But they didn't really become a legend in the other underground until the early 2000s online. And I would say about 2010 when they reformed, it was because they had noticed that momentum was growing and people wanted to buy copies of this dark kind of death thrash metal record from the late 80s. It was technically 1990, but Lock Up Your Children was the original demo. The album was Spectrum of Death. And the Phantom album that was a unfinished record or demo tape from 1992 was Destruction System, and we finally got that in 2015 by way of a small Greek label, if I remember right. So, what is their style? I think let's just cut to a song here to just relieve the pressure here, and you get to hear what this band sounds like now, and then I'll backpedal a little bit. So Morbid Saint have always been in kind of infamously in conversations with death, because they were one of the bands that manager and music industry mogul Eric Grief was managing before he dropped everyone to manage death at kind of their peak around in the late 80s. And basically their sound was always comparable to early, let's say, Creator, Protector, and that kind of thing. It was later on compared to bands like Demolition Hammer and Numbskull, who were probably closer to where they were located at the time, and then their vocalist kind of switched their sound a little bit towards the sadist realm of extreme thrash with a rasped vocal. So very memorable demo tape recordings that became albums, and they kind of have a way about them that says that when you approach this record. But this is probably their first record where you feel a little bit of both records in one. Their sound developed further on, and the first one was that extreme late 80s thrash. The second album was much more of a death metal record. And I guess the way to put that is that there were death metal grooves, but there was still thrash metal intent. It was much more of a death metal album once it finally came out. And this record kind of splits the difference with that a sort of German thrash metal feeling to some of its work. But then there's an aggressive, all guns blazing feeling to it as well. So we can kind of split the difference between Hypnosia, like the comeback from Atomica, which was very brazen and shouted throughout, and a band like Besieged, who are sort of thrash death metal with a little bit of a lean towards death metal because of maybe the drummer's style and certain influences in there. Does it sound like Morbid Saint? I would say it does. I think the vocalist's voice has changed a little bit. I think that the drumming is different altogether, but if you're looking for a direct follow-up to Destruction System, I think this is it. It makes a lot of sense as a follow-up to that, while it also takes care to sound like enough like Morbid Saint that if you've only heard the first album, you'll understand this is a progression several years beyond that point. And they've made a point to remind you that this is an old school band, and there's the Ed Rep cover art. There's the sort of claustrophobic production in terms of the drums, but then again, they give just enough space to the guitar and bass to fling around to where we really get riffs the whole time. We get a very aggressive album overall, one that I would compare to like Epidemic of Violence overall, in terms of the tightened United States late 80s death thrash feel. There are some more death metal features on here, but the vocals and style mix it up a bit. So where this is certainly a death thrash metal band, and a classic one at that. So they've never really lost their touch. They brought back a lot of the original members when they reformed in 2010. Not all of them were there. Here we have a different rhythm section, but everyone else is kind of back in the band otherwise. And, it's important to have the vocalist Pat Lind there. And I think having both guitarists back reminded them of the work they'd done together, and they've kind of matched that pretty well here. Otherwise, yeah, I don't really have any negatives here because I think this is, it's not like this is as much as we could expect, but that we get a lot of really memorable, aggressive, on fire songs here, one after another. There's no real messing around. They don't sound out of touch. It sounds dated in a good way in a lot of ways. It sounds very classic in its approach. We get catchy songs which are memorable for what they have to say, but also for the way they say it. And I think if you're a fan of like Violence and groups like that, you'll additionally appreciate the all-in attack of this record all the way through. They really don't let up very much at all, and it makes it an adrenaline surge and a fairly substantial record overall. I'm not sure about the lasting value of this record. I think that I was never like a die-hard Morbid Saint fan as much as I was a die-hard death thrash metal fan, so I'm willing to give this all the time that it needs and listen to it anytime it pops up. But would I say that it's really top notch and original in that sense? No, and it's all been done before. So they're doing the best version of Morbid Saint that they can, and that's pretty good what they've managed here. Otherwise, I think the production values are particularly strong, especially for this type of album. I think they really understood what they were doing in terms of giving it a little bit of a modern edge, but nothing distasteful. And otherwise, I think it was just, I had a great time listening to this record. It really produces the effect you would want for this style. So, not a totally glowing review, but overall, I think this makes sense as a Morbid Saint record, and it does really well to present something that they should be proud of after so long away from it and taking so long to finally put out a record. So, it's well worth checking out. That's out on February 9th. Tomorrow, and go ahead and listen to some clips and check out my review here on the site.